All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Hayley Milliman, and I am coming to you here from the ProWritingAid team. And we are talking today all about how to edit your fantasy manuscript using ProWritingAid. So as I said, my name is Hayley. I'm the head of education here at ProWritingAid, which is basically the best job in the world because it means I get to do things like this and really just nerd out on writing and editing all day. Before joining ProWritingAid, I worked as a teacher and curriculum developer, and I've also worked as a writer for years and years and years and have published thousands and thousands of blog posts as well as several books. So very, very excited to join you all here today. So today we're going to be talking about copy and really digging into the craft of our manuscripts. And so a lot of this week we have been talking about world building. We've been talking about characterization. We've been talking a lot of big picture ideas. And today we're really going to zoom in and speak specifically about our copy. We're going to look at our sentences. We're going to really dig into how to make those most effective. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about copy edits that fantasy writers need to make. And then we're also going to be specifically looking at how ProWritingAid can help you make those copy edits. So we're going to be talking about the copy edits you should be making, and then also how ProWritingAid can make it really easy and seamless for you. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and dive in. So I want to think about copywriting or writing your copy as a fantasy writer as having two main goals. The first goal is to make your writing more clear. When you are a fantasy writer, you spend a lot of time thinking about your world. You spend a lot of time thinking about your characters. You spend a lot of time thinking about your plot. What we as writers often don't spend as much time thinking about is how our sentences can be more clear. And that's a huge mistake because if we don't focus on how our sentences can be more clear, then those great ideas that we've spent so much time conceptualizing will never be engaging for our readers. If our prose is not clear and is not set up in an effective reader-focused way, then those great ideas that we spent so much time worrying about are just not going to come across. So our first goal as a fantasy writer is to make sure that our writing is clear enough for our readers to understand. Our second goal is to make sure that our writing is engaging. So just because you have great ideas and great characters and you've spent all hours and hours building this amazing world on World Anvil, just because you've spent all that time does not mean that your sentences themselves will actually be engaging. So we need to make sure that our sentences, which are kind of like vehicles for our ideas, are both clear and engaging. If we don't focus on making them clear and engaging, then again, those great ideas that we spent so much time planning and putting together are just not going to come across for our readers. And I know that this is something that is scary for a lot of writers. I know for myself, I like to think about the ideas a lot, but I don't like to think too much about the copy editing and how it actually comes together in our sentences itself, or in my sentences themselves. And so hopefully today I'll demystify that a little bit so I can give you some actionable steps so that you're not just sitting at your sentences going, I don't know if they're clear, I don't know if they're engaging, and you can actually make those changes. Okay, so let's talk about our first goal. Our first goal is to make your writing more clear so your readers understand what's happening. Like I just said, if we are not setting our sentences up in an effective way, then all of those amazing ideas we had they're going to be for nothing. Our readers need to understand what's happening and need to be able to engage with our writing in order, again, for those ideas to shine. So there's three ways to do this, and we're going to focus on three specific ways today. The first is to make your subjects and verbs the stars of your writing. The second is to ensure your writing is readable for your audience. And the third is to choose specific and vivid words. This is all with the goal of making our writing more clear. So making it so that our readers understand what we're trying to say. Let's go into, so for each of these, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about each of the ideas and then also how ProWritingAid specifically can help with that. So the first idea was to make our subjects and verbs the stars of our sentences. So in order to do this, we need to do two things. The first thing is to eliminate passive voice. So passive voice is when you have set up a sentence so that the object of the sentence comes before the subject. So instead of saying something like the passive voice or the present was opened by Jane, or sorry, instead of saying something like Jane opened the present, which is active voice, if you say the present was opened by Jane, that's passive voice. The object, which is the present, was being opened by Jane. So in that instance, our sentences are longer and more complicated. Another way to make our subjects and verbs the stars is to reduce something called hidden verbs. Hidden verbs is when you take a verb, an action word, and hide it into a noun phrase. So instead of saying something like, I'm going to announce my decision on Friday, you'll say, I'll make an announcement of my decision on Friday. That's when you hide a verb. You basically take a really powerful action word and you turn it into a noun phrase. Now, both subjects and verbs carry all of the power in our writing. So if we're not doing a good job making those the stars of our sentences, then our sentences are going to be less effective. Now, fixing these things can be tricky. And fixing those things can be tricky because they're not technically incorrect. So I already saw that someone in the Q&A said, is it okay to use passive voice? And the answer is yes, passive voice is technically correct. So if you're just using Microsoft Word or Scrivener or something like that, it's not going to flag as grammatically incorrect because it's technically right. Same thing with hidden verbs. Hidden verbs are technically grammatically correct. So it can be really challenging to find those in your writing. And that's where a software like ProWritingAid comes in, or that's where ProWritingAid specifically comes in. So I'm going to be going back and forth between ProWriting the software and then back to our points in the presentation. But let's just take a look at ProWritingAid specifically. So I know at the beginning of this in the chat, a lot of people said that they had passive voice instances in their writing, which is very, very, very common. So here's a great example of a passive voice sentence. Fierce strokes across their horned helmets could be seen by the onlookers. So in this sentence, the onlookers are the ones who are doing the action. They're the ones doing the seeing, right? But they come all the way at the end of the sentence. So they're kind of hidden. Our subject is hidden at the end of the sentence. So again, the sentence is technically grammatically correct, but it's set up in a more complicated way. And our subject, again, is no longer the star. It's all the way at the end of the sentence. So as you are reading your own writing, you might not recognize this, but a tool like ProWritingAid can find instances of passive voice in here, just like we have here, and offer a suggestion. So what I have showing you right now is ProWritingAid's real-time report. The real-time report shows you real-time suggestions for your grammar, style, and spelling. And you can see here that they are highlighted in these different colors, as well as specific ones for passive voice. So if passive voice is a problem for you, like it looks like dozens and dozens of people said in the chat, you can use ProWritingAid's real-time checker to come in here, find instances of passive voice, and make changes. So you can just click here. Sometimes ProWritingAid will suggest an alternative for how you could rephrase the sentence. Other times it might just tell you that it's passive voice and you can write the alternative yourself. But either way, it helps you identify these instances where you've hidden your subjects, which again makes your writing typically more complex and less effective because the subjects should always be the stars of our sentences. Annette was saying, yeah, in the chat that she has this problem. Yes, exactly, same. So again, using our real-time checker, you can come in here and you can find passive voice errors and easily make changes to those. Now, somebody in the question was asking about hidden verbs. So hidden verbs are our action words. So words like jump, run, announce, something like that. A hidden verb is when you take a verb, so announce, and turn it into a noun phrase. So instead of saying announce, you say make an announcement. Or instead of saying decide, you say make a decision. So you take that kind of powerful word and you turn it into a longer phrase that takes the power out of the real verb. I do this all the time if I'm nervous to say something to like a partner or at work or something like that, if I'm trying to kind of hedge my language a little bit more, I'll be like, oh, I'll make a decision Friday, that type of thing, where you're kind of trying to hide the action word. And again, there's some instances where this might be okay, but overall, we want to try to eliminate those instances, because again, it's taking the power out of our subjects and verbs, which are the most powerful words in our sentences, or they should be. So ProWritingAid can also help you with that. And I'll come back. It looks like a couple of people were saying they didn't even know that this is a thing and they do it all the time. Yes, me too. I do this all the time. And we can similarly find instances of hidden verbs in ProWritingAid. And again, they're not grammatically incorrect. So they're not grammatically incorrect. They won't flag in Microsoft Word or anything like that. But like I just said, they are ways that take the power out of your action words. So it's important to make those changes if you can. So I'm going to leave some of the mistakes in here, and we'll come back and we'll edit this document all at the end so we can check out some of the other features. But ProWritingAid will also help you with those hidden verbs where, again, you've taken the power out of your action verbs. It looks like Caleb and Karen are doing that too. So they make your verbs less effective. Okay, so another thing that we need to think about. So first, we wanted to think about, when we're thinking about making our sentences more clear, we want to make our subjects and our verbs the stars. They need to be our most powerful verbs, or most powerful words, rather. Now, the second thing we need to think about is making sure our writing is readable for our audience. Now, this is a big one, and this is a mistake that a lot of authors make, especially if you're newer. So if you are a newer author, or if you just haven't thought about readability too often, a lot of times writers target a readability score that is too complicated for their audience. Now, I want to highlight the word audience there, because what your readability score is will change depending on your audience. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. When we're writing fiction for a mass market audience, so that means for millions of people to read it, that type of thing, we typically want to target around a 7th or 8th grade reading level. So that means that the words and the sentence structures we use could, in theory, be understood by a 7th or 8th grader. Now, that does not mean that the ideas are that immature, right? So this is something that people get confused a lot of times. They think, oh, if I'm at a 7th grade reading level, that means my book is for 7th graders. And that it could not be further from the truth. You can set your sentences up in a way that they could be understood by 7th graders. But again, the ideas in them can be more complex. And I want you guys to think about when you're reading fiction, right? Sometimes when we're reading fiction, we want to read something that's a little bit easier and a little bit more enjoyable. Faith in the chat asks about 7th graders. That's around like 12 to 13-year-olds. So 12 to 13 is about the kind of age of vocabulary and sentence structure you want to set up. So you want to target your sentences so that they're set up in a way that a 7th or 8th grader could understand them, even if your thematic material is more complex. That is totally fine. Now, I wanted to say that we talked about targeting an appropriate readability score. So 7th to 8th grade is kind of your target if you're writing for a mass audience, but you might go a little bit more advanced than that if you're writing in, say, an academic context or something like that, or if you know all of your audience is going to have a specific domain knowledge. So the goal here is to target an appropriate readability score for your audience. So the hundreds of people who are watching this, all of us will probably have a slightly different readability score because, again, we all have slightly different audiences. So what you want to think about here is thinking about what your audience will understand. Now, as we are here writing science fiction and fantasy, our readers will probably understand different terms that a romance audience might not understand. So if you're writing science fiction, a science fiction audience might be more familiar or more used to reading about interstellar travel or something like that. So it's okay to have words in your manuscripts that are related to interstellar travel. If you're writing romance, you might want to skip those, right? So the goal is to figure out what's appropriate readability for your audience and to make changes based on that. Now, there's some questions in the chat about how we target appropriate readability and how we make changes to that. And we'll talk about it in ProWritingAid itself in a second. But our goal is to use simple words, simple structures, and also to make our sentences less wordy, which brings me to my second point. So one of my favorite features of ProWritingAid is something called our sticky sentences report, which I'll show you here. So the sticky sentences report finds sentences in your writing, and I think we've got more in our science fiction one. It finds sentences in your writing that have too many words called glue words. So glue words are the words in your sentences that make the sentence stick together. They're the words that you could interchange and they would not change the meaning of your sentence. So the other type of words, so we've got glue words, which do not change the meaning of your sentence. And the other type of words we have are working words. So working words are words that you cannot touch or else they would change the meaning of your sentence. So let me give you an example. If I was saying, Hayley sat near the table, right? And I changed out Hayley for Doug, the meaning of the sentence would change. So Hayley is a working word. We cannot change it because if I changed Hayley for Doug, the whole sentence would be very different. So those are working words. Now, glue words, on the other hand, are words that hold your sentences together. Think prepositions, think articles, conjunctions, things that you can change in and out, and they wouldn't change the meaning of your sentence. If you have too many of those in your writing, your sentences are going to become harder to read because they're going to become longer and unwieldy. So at ProWritingAid, we typically recommend that you have about 40% glue words and 60% working words in your sentences. So that means about 60% are your nouns, your verbs, those stars, those types of things, whereas 40% are your conjunctions, your prepositions, all of that stuff. Now, if you're working on your manuscript yourself, that will be really, really challenging to find, which is why using a tool like ProWritingAid can really, really help. You can use the sticky sentences report to open up specific sentences and find where you have a higher percentage, then hover over the sentence, see exactly what your glue words are so that you can know how to make those changes, okay? So again, our second principle of writing good fantasy is making sure that our writing is readable. So we want to do two things to make sure that is happening. One is to target an appropriate readability score. The second is to make sure that our sentences are not too long, not too unwieldy, not too cluttered with glue words, because otherwise they will be less readable. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to focus on the sticky sentences report as we are talking about how ProWritingAid can help you is because readability is not a one-size-fits-all approach. So a lot of times people say, oh, Hayley, I think I've done that. I think I've written my document. It's way too hard to read for my audience. How do I change it? The good and bad thing is that there are many changes you'll have to make. It's good because that means that you don't have to eliminate all of one category of thing from your writing. You have a little bit of flexibility, but it's bad because there's not one simple answer. A readability score calculates numerous different things. One of them is sentence length, so that's how the sticky sentences check can help you. Others are the types of words you're using. So are you using simple words, or are you, like some people in the chat said, using really, really complex words? Are you using passive voice? So like we talked about before, passive voice sentence constructions make your sentences more long and unwieldy. Are you using domain-specific vocabulary, that type of thing? So there's a lot of different ways that you can improve readability. But using a tool like ProWritingAid will help you assess all of those. So first, in our real-time report, which again is what I've just defaulted back to, you will see recommendations for fixing readability errors like this one. So for instance, adding extra words like aiming to try to meet makes your sentences clunkier and more unwieldy for your readers. So just removing words like this can help improve your readability. And I know a lot of people in the chat were saying that they add extra words like that, or they just add extra words to your sentences. Same thing here. Began to leap into action. You can just say leaped into action. All of these kind of small suggestions will help improve the readability of your document by making your sentences less clunky. So that's one way we can help. You'll also see over here in your goals, or also in our readability report, your overall document readability. Now, your overall document readability will help you understand the readability of your overall document, as well as places where you might want to focus to make specific changes. So this breaks down your overall document, as well as, again, places where you can focus in on where there is a specific paragraph that's too difficult to read. So that way you're not going through your whole document, you're just zooming in on the spaces where you'll have the most impact if your readability score is too high. So again, there's multiple options here that can help you make your readability more effective, easier, without just sitting there and being like, okay, my readability is too high. What do I do from here? Now, I also want to back up to talking about just an appropriate readability goal in general. So one of the things that we've recently introduced, and some of you guys might have this feature, but everyone will have it pretty soon, are our goals reports. So these goals reports here on the left-hand side, which you could also see if you run our summary report, will give you specific recommendations for your genre. So you can see that I have my text set to fantasy here because this is a fantasy manuscript. So it tells me that my readability grade is in an appropriate range for my specific genre. If I were to change this to academic or something like that, or if I were to write in business or anything like that, my ranges for each of these goals would change. So we've added custom suggestions based on your genre using other text in your genre, so that way you are able to make the kind of appropriate decisions for what you're writing. Now, I see a ton of questions coming through in the chat. Can you guys please drop them in the Q&A, just because I want to make sure that I can get to as many of them as possible, and I don't want to miss any of them. So Steph and Greer and Christine and Renee and everyone who just dropped one in the chat, it's probably going to disappear quickly. So if you can put it over into the Q&A, which is in the bottom middle of your screen, that way I can see it. Thanks. Okay, so readability, super, super important. We want to make sure we're choosing the right words. We want to make sure that we're setting them up and setting our sentences up in a way that's effective for our readers. All of this is with the goal of making our writing more clear. Remember, our first goal as a fantasy writer, if we want those ideas to shine, we need to make our writing more clear. Now, our final thing about clarity is to choose specific and vivid words. So I want you to think about clarity as not just simple, but simple and specific, okay? So clarity means that our readers can understand what we're trying to say, and also that the portrait of what they're saying in their mind is clear enough for us to understand, right? So if you're not choosing specific or vivid words, then your readers might misunderstand what you're saying. So to do this, we need to do two things. First, we need to avoid vague words and phrases. So if you're saying something like tall, he was tall or she was tall or something like that, that's not specific enough. I know I'm sitting down, so you can't tell, but I am really short. So everyone is tall compared to me. So if I read, that a character is tall in a manuscript, then it's really not going to give me very much information at all. Or a character is strong, like strong could mean truly anything. So we want to make sure that our language choice, the language that we have included, is specific enough so that our readers get a very, very vivid portrait. The other thing that we need to make sure that we're doing is reducing our reliance on ineffective adverbs. So ineffective adverbs are adverbs that really don't add anything to our writing. We want to make sure that every single word that we have put into our manuscript is as important as possible. So rather than saying ran quickly, where you have two kind of ineffective words, you could say something like sprinted, which again is a more vivid picture and a more effective picture as well. Someone in the chat saying that they're also short. Yes, yeah, it's a blessing and a curse. we look young for a long time. Anyway, but our goal here as fantasy writers is to make sure that the words that we're choosing are as effective as possible. So we need to make sure that in order to be clear, we're not just choosing simple sentences and simple structures, but also specific words so that our readers get the best picture in their mind. I always like to think about this with kind of the camera test. So if you closed your eyes, or if your readers closed their eyes, would they be able to picture exactly what you're trying to say? Someone on the webinar yesterday said this, and I apologize if it was you. Please tell me in the chat because I'm stealing it. But would your reader be able to create accurate fan art? That's kind of the thing you want to think about here. Are you describing things in a way that your reader could come out and make some amazing fan art that is exactly the way you pictured your characters, you pictured your world? So we need to make sure that we're giving them those tools by choosing specific and vivid words to make that happen. Okay, so in terms of how ProWritingAid can help you with that, so we have a bunch of different options for that, and we're going to talk a little bit more about about repeats and redundancies in our next section, but I do want to call your attention to our diction report, which will highlight exact instances of vague or abstract words, places where you've used words that don't really mean anything, and you can replace them with a more effective word, or places where you've used adverbs that, again, just really don't add anything there. Our dialogue check will also find places where you've used dialogue tags, and then in our goals report as well, you'll find places where you've used adverbs with your dialogue tags. So dialogue tags with adverbs is a really good indication that you have done way too much telling. So instead of saying, like we said, instead of saying ran quickly, saying sprinted, right? So anytime you've used a dialogue tag with an adverb, it's probably an instance where you have done too much of that, kind of telling your reader how somebody's going to feel rather than showing or painting that picture that could exist in fan art. And don't worry, I'm seeing all the questions come up and I will get to them all at the end. So do not worry. Okay, so again, we want to make sure that we are, in order to make our documents more clear, we need to first make sure our subjects and verbs are the stars. We need to second make sure that our documents are readable for our specific audience. And again, remember, we want to use that goals feature. We want to be thinking about who our audience is to make sure that our readability is effective for them. And then finally, we need to choose specific and vivid words to make sure that the portrait of what we're trying to say is as clear as possible. So we need to make sure that it's not just simple enough to understand, but also specific enough so that that fan art is as accurate as we want it to be. Okay, so ProWritingAid can help. Now, our next goal with our copy is to make sure that it is engaging. So we've, in our first kind of half, talked about how to make it clear and simple and specific. Our next goal is to make our writing more engaging. So we want our writing to be engaging, so readers want to keep reading our book. If our writing is not engaging, they will start to snore, they will put it away, and that is no good because you've spent hours and hours building your world, crafting amazing characters, and we want them to keep reading. So there's 3 ways to make your writing more engaging using ProWritingAid. The first is to avoid echoes, redundancies, and repeating yourself, which is one of those things that I talked about at the very beginning. This is my bad habit. So we need to avoid those. If you have too many echoes or redundancies, your reader is going to be like, this is boring. I've heard this before. This is not engaging enough. The second is to keep up the pace, okay? In fantasy writing, you may have some sections that are slower paced, but we also want to keep up the pace so that we are moving through different events and that we're not just too bogged down in description. And then we also need to use sensory words that create a vivid picture for readers. This is specifically important for fantasy writing. When people read fantasy, they want to escape into a new world. If we are not creating an engaging world, then our readers are not going to get that kind of escapist situation that they'd like. And so again, this kind of goes back to what we talked about at the beginning. When you spend so much time doing world building, writing down the history of your world, writing down your characters, you owe it to your manuscript to make sure that the way you've set up your writing and the way you've set up your sentences does all of that planning justice. I think, again, this is especially important for fantasy writing. We spend so much time thinking about our world. We did exercises yesterday thinking about the history of our world and that type of thing. If we do not use sensory words to then convey that to our readers effectively, they're going to disengage. So we need to make sure it happens. So let's first talk about echoes, redundancies, and repeats, because again, this is something that I am very, very guilty of. So when you are writing, you want to make sure that every word counts. And that means that we have to eliminate places where we have said the same thing over and over again. There's a couple ways that we can do it. So one of the things that I do often is redundancies, which is exactly right here. Bright and brilliant mean exactly the same thing. We're wasting words here. So let's just pick one. And then if we want to have another adjective, let's pick an adjective that does not say the same thing twice. So you can come and use the real-time report to find places you've used redundancies like bright and brilliant or cold and frosty. Again, exact examples of how these are redundant phrases where you have said the same exact thing over and over, and you're not using your words as effectively as you possibly can. Now, this also works in so this is, again, the real-time report that I'm showing you here. The echoes and repeats reports, the echoes and repeat report also will help you find specific places where you have echoed or repeated phrases. So across the ice fields, across the red and snow, across the red and snow drifts, like you're saying that over and over again. That's what I'm really guilty of, is getting a specific phrase. Like, we walked across the ice fields. Here, this is a sample of writing that I adopted. So clearly I have some issues with repeats. But the goal here with our echoes report is to find those places where you have echoed yourself over and over again, and you can make changes there to remove them or replace them, again, to avoid that feeling that your reader has of just like, this is redundant, I've heard this before. We want to make sure that our readers are moving forward and feeling like every word matters for them, and everything is engaging. Yeah, Nancy and Heather are saying in the chat that they are very guilty of this, which I'm clearly too as well. And then our repeats check, and I'm just not going to show it for time, but our repeats check also does very similar things. It finds repeated 4, 3, 2-word phrases, and if we have time at the end, I'll show you guys how that works, but so that you can find the places where you've said, again, across the hidden fields, that type of thing. We also need to improve the pacing of our writing. So like I said, in fantasy, it is possible that you will have places where your pacing is moving quickly. Like if you're in a battle scene, if you are in dialogue, your pacing is probably quick. And there might be also places where your pacing is a little bit slower, right? So if you're doing description, or if you are talking about the history of something, your pacing might be a little bit slower. But our goal is to make sure that we don't have too many long sentences in a row so that our readers get discouraged. I don't know if anyone's ever read fantasy that feels very tome-like, where you're just sitting there and you're like, oh gosh, like, you know, pages and pages and pages of history without any action happening, right? So sometimes that might be fine, but we do want to kind of keep up the pacing for our readers, so that they're not getting kind of stuck in that. So there's a couple of ways that we can fix this using ProWritingAid. So one of the ways is to use the goals check. And I know Hector in the chat was saying he doesn't have goals yet. Don't worry, it's been rolled out to some users, but it's going to be rolled out for everyone very, very soon. I'm just showing you guys how to use it now so that when it's rolled out for you, you will know how to use it right away. So it's being rolled out to everyone, like basically as we speak. Okay, so our slow pacing report here under goals will tell you places where you have slower paced paragraphs in a row. We also have a specific pacing check, which can help you visualize this and find which specific paragraphs are slowly paced so that you can take a look at them and decide, you know what, it's okay. I've decided that I want to keep this description or not. This report is kind of a perfect example of what I think is the best part of ProWritingAid, which is that most of the suggestions are just giving you or not most, but a lot of the suggestions are just giving you information about your writing that you wouldn't have before. So when you're putting your manuscript into Scrivener or into Word or anything like that, you're not going to have information about your pacing. So ProWritingAid's pacing report will help you find places where you might want to pay more attention. It's not telling you that you have to. So as the author, you still have final agency over deciding, you know what, I'm okay with the pacing here. But it's giving you that information of things that you might not have realized before so that you can decide to make that choice. And you can kind of make it consciously rather than just having it happen as a bad habit. Again, that's kind of how I feel about my bad habit, the repeats and echoes. I just don't even realize they're happening. So using ProWritingAid is so useful because I can find those bad habits and fix them where I wouldn't before. Excuse me. Where I wouldn't before because I wouldn't see them. Okay, so ProWritingAid can help us keep the pacing of our writing more engaging. Now, let's also talk about sensory words. so passionate about repeats, guys. I can't, I'm coughing. Anyway, so we need to also use sensory words to create a vivid picture for our readers. And if we're not using sensory words, then we're not giving a vivid enough picture for our readers. So all of that world building we've done, all of that characterization development, all of that plotting is just not going to come alive for our readers in the same way. So this is where the sensory report comes in. It's one of the kind of hidden gems of ProWritingAid that a lot of people don't use. And I want to talk about this here because I think it's really important specifically for fantasy writers. So the sensory report will tell you how many of the 5 senses words that you've used. And I think it's really important because it'll tell you, A, if you have used enough of them, right? So are you doing enough description so that, again, thinking back to that fan art concept, have people have you used enough sensory words so that anyone making your fan art could create an actual example of it? But also, are you divvying your senses up enough? A lot of people rely too heavily on sight sense words, and they do not use the other sense words. So words like touch, taste, sound, to really kind of round out that experience. So here we want to make sure that not only are we using sensory words effectively throughout our manuscript, but that we're also not, like this sample is doing, heavily relying on sight words over all of the other senses, because we want to create a rounded, well-rounded, and really immersive experience when we're describing our world. So it's really important to make sure that we've covered all of our senses and not just one or the other, because then again, our writing is not going to be as effective. Okay. So again, our goal for, someone saying guilty as charged for using the visuals only, very similarly. Again, this is my sample. You can see we rely really heavily often on visual sensory words. And if we add more, then we're able to create, again, that kind of immersive experience that we're going for. So to recap, and before we go into some of the other features of ProWritingAid, we want to think about 2 things as writers when we're thinking about our craft, our copy. We need to first make sure our sentences are set up in a clear and engaging way. And remember, when we're clear and engaging, that means our sentences are simple. We use effective words, but we also use specific words. So not just simple, clear sentences, but simple, clear sentences with specific words so that people can really get that vivid portrait. And then we also need to make sure that our writing is engaging. And to make our writing engaging, we need to eliminate any repeats, redundancies that are going to set off that kind of boring feeling for our readers. We need to make sure that we are using clear sensory words to engage them as well. And then we need to keep up the pacing so people do not get caught in specific areas where they're just like those hundreds and hundreds of pages of text on dust settling, which is what I saw in the chat before. And Edda has a great point that writing a blind character or a character who doesn't see or does not rely on sight, or if you're in a world where it's really dark all the time, making sure that you have those other senses will create that immersive experience and create a more vivid experience too. Excuse me. Okay. So before we dive into questions, I just want to talk about a couple other features of ProWritingAid. So the sensory report was here on more reports, and then it's right here at the bottom. Okay. So what I was showing you guys when we first pulled this up, and I'll do a quick kind of overview of ProWritingAid before we go into questions, is our real-time checker. Again, some of you may not see the goals here just yet. We are rolling them out to users right now, but some of you will have them. If you don't have them here, you can find them in the summary report. So if they're not in your sidebar, they will be in your summary report. And we're just kind of moving those over into the sidebar now so you can have easy access to them. But don't worry, if you don't have them in your sidebar, run a summary report and you'll still see the same thing. You'll see your goals. Okay. So this is the real-time checker. Again, like we talked about before, the real-time checker gives you edits on grammar, style, spelling, and passive voice. Then you can go into each of the reports, which we talked about during the presentation. Now I want to highlight a couple key features of what's great about this. So not only are these goals, which we talked about, that you can edit and make specific for your specific type of writing, but we also have a lot of other in-app features. So our summary report, first of all, which I will run again. If you run this, it can also give comparisons to authors of your choice. So I have mine set to compare first for the average for fantasy for my document type, but then also for a specific author. So you can change and select authors. I just have Margaret Atwood, but we have tons of different fantasy authors in there as well. So you can see, again, not only how your document relates to your genre and your usage in your genre, but an author that you really love, which is just really fun to see how you stack up against one of your publishing heroes. So that's really exciting. We also have multiple different integrations. So all of the amazing things that you see here, you can get in many different places. So I am showing you the web editor right now. We also have a Chrome extension. The Chrome extension lets you, I'm going to try to get meta here for a second. The Chrome extension lets you edit things where you are writing. on Chrome. So let me just pull over my window over here. So if I pull over my window here and I wanted to type something for you guys in the Fantasy Writers group, I could type something here. Here is my sentence, and ProWritingAid, it's going to take a while because I'm running too many windows, but ProWritingAid's little window right here will either give you suggestions on what you're saying here, as well as pulling up the overall editor so that you can open it and see it. So this you can use basically everywhere across the web. You can use it in Facebook, like I just did. Again, just cursorily, you can use it in Gmail, you can use it in WordPress if you're writing on Wattpad, if you're writing in like AO3, if you're writing anywhere where you are writing fantasy, Google Docs, exactly. Google, we have a specific Google Docs extension, which I'll show you in a second. Any of those places that you are writing, you can get the full ProWritingAid editor through Chrome or Safari or Firefox to get access for all of that. I want to make sure that I have enough time to cover questions. So we do have a Google Docs editor. I'll drop some links. I think Lisa came here. So Lisa, if you can grab the Google Docs blog post and just drop it into the chat so that I can talk a little bit about Scrivener. We also have a desktop app that lets you natively edit files from Scrivener, from Final Draft, from Ulysses, from all these different types of word processors. So you can use them in our desktop app and then make edits right to them and then open them up back in your program of choice and see the edits right there. So lots of our Scrivener users use that. We also have an integration in Microsoft Word, and basically all of this comes with your ProWritingAid premium subscription. I want to show you guys just a couple more things. I know we're breezing through, but I want to make sure we have time for questions. A couple other quick features that we have are in-app articles. So that is why I saved this passive voice option. So as I talked about a little bit before, our goal with ProWritingAid is to not only just suggest corrections for you, but to give you the information to decide whether you need to make that correction or not, right? So some people in the chat have asked about, is it okay, when should I use passive voice? When should I not use passive voice? That type of thing. Now, we have added with this little orange eye, a lot of reports and articles that can help you decide whether or not you need to make that change. So if you click this little eye here, you will open up your document. You will see an article that tells you what the suggestion is, as well as some examples of it. And then they also have really fun videos here that can help you, again, decide, do I need to make this change or do I not? Again, the goal is to empower you to make decisions about your writing. I think somebody else had talked about how they often confused your different versions of yours. So we also have quizzes for confused words that you can access that same way by coming in here, clicking the orange eye, and then going to the full article again. So you can just test your knowledge, learn more about what you're writing, and make it more effective. Okay, so before we get into questions, just a couple last things. I want to think about when using kind of ProWritingAid best practices, I want you to think about how you can make this software work for you. So I think at the beginning of the session, a lot of people were talking about how they have ProWritingAid, but they're not really sure what they're using or how to use it or any of that type of stuff. So first of all, I want to just encourage you that it's okay to figure out the best way to make this software work for you. I have my own ways of using it. So I actually, when I write in ProWritingAid, I turn my real-time checker off until I'm ready to edit. So I don't get any edits until I'm ready to edit. Then I go through my real-time checker. Then I look at all my goals and I say, okay, I'm out here, my sticky words are a little high, my dialogue tags need work, my ing starts need work, and then I zero in on those one at a time. So I don't look at any edits until I'm ready to yet, okay? So that's my process, and that's how it works best for me because I get stressed out if I see edits as I'm writing. Some people like to see edits as they're writing, so they like to have the real-time checker working for them as they go. Whatever the way you want to use it, it's totally fine. That's why the software is so customizable, so that you can make changes and make your editing process work for you. So I really just want to encourage you that if it seems overwhelming to you, or if you feel like you're getting too much information, do it like I do it. Turn off the real-time checker, then come back to it when you're ready. Or again, if you like having those edits as you're going and like having that feedback as you're going, then that's totally fine, and you can keep it on as well. So you can make it work for you and your writing process. Okay, we'll talk about ProWritingAid University at the end because we've just got a lot of questions. So let's go ahead and dive into some of them. All right, let me see. what we've got. Okay. Tons. All right, we've got 72 questions. I definitely will not be able to get through all 72 in the next 11 minutes, but what I will do is I will do an AMA and ask me anything in the Facebook group about this. So if I do not answer your question, I will be on in the Facebook group later today to do an ask me anything so that you can catch up with me. And let me just drop the link for the Facebook group into the chat here so that you can join me on that if you're not. So I'm going to get through as many as I can. And then again, if you have more questions, just let me know. And I will try to get through as many of them as I can. Okay, let's see. So, all right. Okay, so a couple of people have asked, does ProWritingAid take into consideration use of dialects? Can you customize words? Can you customize dictionaries? That type of thing. So language. So you can add any word to your dictionary. So if there is a word that is spelled incorrectly, you can add it to your dictionary, and then the spelling errors will go away. So any of these words that are kind of unknown, I could add them to my dictionary, and then it would no longer be incorrect. So you can totally do that to customize it for yourself. Okay, so Steph asks, I love the goals feature. I'm curious how we built that feature technically. How do we come up with different goals for different genres? So we have an amazing team called our NLP team here at ProWritingAid, and their job, they are natural language processors. Their job is to basically just make sure that we are creating great goals, creating great rules, and that will really be effective for your writing. So what they do is they take all these published books and they create what's called like a corpus of these books, and they run it against it. So they create a corpus of dozens and dozens and dozens of fantasy books. They run analysis on those fantasy books to see, okay, in those dozens and dozens of fantasy books, what are, how many adverbs per 100 words are typically used. So they create an average based on published writing in specific genres, which is awesome. So Jonathan has a great question. Is there a readability that's too low for an adult fantasy? If so, what's the best way to approach it? I don't think that there is a readability that is necessarily too low, but I do want to think, are you communicating complex ideas and are you using domain-specific words? So again, the goal is not to eliminate every specific domain word you have, but to use them when they're most effective, right? So if you're in science fiction, again, and you are talking about interstellar travel or anything like that, it is totally fine to use that because your audience will probably understand it, right? So you don't need to eliminate everything, but you do need to think through, what will my specific audience understand? So if you have a readability that's really, really low, then you have some room to work with. So you have some room to add some more complex sentence structures or words if you'd like to. All right, let me see. Patrick asked, would the echoes see exact phrases over a large section of the manuscript? Yes, it does. It will see exact phrases. So echoes and all repeats will find, like, again, 1, 2, 3, 4 word phrases over throughout your manuscript or throughout whatever section you have. See you, Natalie. Thanks for joining us. Okay. Oh my gosh, there's just so many questions. Set your goal to fantasy on the Microsoft Word add-in. So we are, again, we're rolling out some of these goals features. So some of you might not see them quite the same way.
Hayley, do you want to show them how they can choose their comparison authors?
Yes, I was just about to do that. Yeah. So if you go into settings and then you go into app settings, this is where you can do a bunch of different things, but you can also check your author comparison here. So you can see we have a ton. So if you guys are, I know I've told, if you've been on webinars with me, I've been talking about Sarah Moss a lot, but Leigh Bardugo is another one of my favorite YA authors. Plug for her Netflix series that is coming out soon, which is great fantasy, YA fantasy. We also have just tons of other different authors here. So you can come in, you can select the author. If you want to compare to Tolkien or anything like that, you can come in, select your author here. Again, that's by going up here to reports and then going to settings and then app settings for your user app settings. All right. Let's see.
Do you want to show people how they can add things to their dictionary? I think that's really important for fantasy writers that have strange character names in places, etc.
Yep. So anywhere you have a misspelled word, you can just hover over it and then hit add to dictionary, and you can see it just disappears because it's now been added to our dictionary. So it's no longer a spelling error, which is awesome. Let's see. How much text can ProWritingAid reasonably handle? That is, how high can the word count get before it becomes impractical for ProWritingAid to review the whole text? So this is Kevin's question. I think it's a really good one, and I like to approach this question in a couple ways. So one is that in theory, the software could handle tens of thousands of words at a time, but I don't think that that's the most effective way to use it, either for you or for the software itself. I like to think, especially if you have a finished manuscript, of going chapter by chapter. I think that's just way more effective, again, both for the speed of the software and then for you too. You don't want to sit down and edit your entire fantasy manuscript in one go. So I would, again, this is my particular way of using the software. I think it's better to upload a chapter at a time, work through that chapter, then close, and then go to the next one. Again, within the desktop app, it makes it really easy to go into specific like Scrivener files, so you can edit one at a time. You can even upload within here, you can upload multi-chapter Word documents, and it'll, again, differentiate chapter by chapter, which, again, just makes it easier and it makes it faster. In terms of like how many specific words, again, I'd say around the 10,000 mark is probably how much you want to edit at one time to be most effective, but then also just keeping in mind speed, because some of these really in-depth reports, if you're running on like 100,000 words, will take a really, really long time. Okay. Oh, so someone has a great question. I wanted to ask, if we use ProWritingAid comprehensively, would I still need a professional editor before I self-publish? I would say probably, but that's going to depend a lot on your writing process, your goals for self-publishing, and a number of factors. So we like to say that ProWritingAid is not a replacement for a human editor. So if having a human editor or having a beta reader or something like that is something that's in your budget and in your writing process, we would 100% encourage you to do that. ProWritingAid will never replace the human editor. That's not the point. The goal with ProWritingAid is to clean up your manuscript, to make sure it's clear, engaging, and effective, so that that human editor is giving you feedback in the most effective way possible. If you're paying an editor, you want to make sure that that editor is giving you feedback on your ideas and how effectively you've executed them, not telling you that you have used the wrong your, or not telling you that you've said bright and brilliant snow 400 times in your manuscript. That is just not an effective use of your time or their time or your money. So our goal with ProWritingAid is to help you clean up the copy, clean up your language, clean up how, again, clear and effective you can be. So that way, when you're using a human editor, you are not wasting your time and wasting your money. Yeah, Paul says that he used ProWritingAid and a pro editor, and then ProWritingAid absolutely cut down the editor time and saved a lot of time and money. And the editor was really impressed with how tight and clean the draft is. And that's exactly the goal, to get a really tight, really clean draft so that the editor is then making effective changes to your ideas, to your characterization, to your plot, that type of thing. And in terms of like whether you need to have a human editor, there are also other tools. So there's tools for assessing your plot, like Fictionary, that we work with a lot of times, which can help. So if you're really budget tight, I don't want to say that you have to use a human editor if that's not in your budget. But if it is and you'd like to, then we would totally make that available for you. Okay, let me see. I'll answer one more question. And then again, I will put an Ask Me Anything into the Facebook group. So that way I can answer any of those questions. So a couple of people have asked some questions on inclusions for ProWritingAid. So if you have ProWritingAid Premium, you have unlimited word count. Let me go actually back to my slide, because I have a slide on that at the beginning. So if you get ProWritingAid Premium, here we go. You have unlimited word count, so you can edit as many words as you'd like. You have all of those different reports that we just talked about, real time, all the way to sensory, etc. You also have access to those in-app articles, videos, quizzes that we talked about, the goals feature, which again, for everyone is available in the summary right now, but some of you will be seeing it in your sidebar and everyone will get it in the sidebar very shortly. The author comparisons you can already do through the settings feature that we showed. With ProWritingAid Premium, you also get access to all of our integrations. So Chrome, Word, Scrivener, Final Draft, all of that stuff, Safari, Firefox, all of those are included with your ProWritingAid subscription. And you can use them all. You can use every one of those versions with your subscription. So you can have ProWritingAid in your desktop app, you can have the web editor, and you can have Chrome. That's all included in one subscription. You can also have it on multiple computers. So I have I'm on my desktop right now. I also have a laptop. I have ProWritingAid on both. So it's a per user license. Per user grants you multiple computers as well as multiple integrations. So you can use it kind of everywhere. And yeah, so I think that's about all that we have time for. I know we have another session coming up shortly. I'm going to drop the links again into the chat. I would love if you guys are interested in ProWritingAid. Again, we're doing a 40% off premium subscription right now for both annual and lifetime. Please feel free to take advantage of that if you are interested. It's a great deal. And then again, I will set up an Ask Me Anything in the Facebook group using that final link. So if you have a question that was not answered here, head over to the Facebook group and I will be happy to answer questions over there about the tool, about editing and anything like that. And then I'll also be doing another presentation this Friday. So if you decide to upgrade for premium, Friday of Fantasy Writers Week is our premium only day. So on that day, I will be doing another session specifically on the different phases of your editing journey. So we'll be talking more about craft and copy there too, but we'll also be talking about content editing. So how we do settings, how we do plot, how we do all that type of stuff. And then proofreading as well. And then we'll also be getting in a little bit more to ProWritingAid University there and how we can work with you in a kind of more one-on-one and group setting to get live human feedback in addition to the web editor. All right, so thank you guys all so much. Thank you for coming. Again, check out the Facebook group for the Ask Me Anything, and we will catch you soon. Thanks, everyone.